Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of The Extra Shift. I'm Chris here as always with Brendon. How you going?
Pretty good, pretty good. I've been plied with alcohol, so if I'm less coherent on this episode, look, it's probably just normal.
Yeah, it's just normal really. And again, it's an in-person recording, which is also why there's no video, because we couldn't make any of the streaming videos work with hotel Wi-Fi.
I'm slightly disappointed because we actually have kind of a nice
setup.
a nicer setup than usual. We're like sitting, like picture it, viewer, listener, in your mind's eye. We have a little coffee table. We have two chairs slightly turned towards each other.
Yep.
I'm disappointed that this hotel doesn't have a fern to put beside us.
Would have been perfect.
Otherwise, it would have been a perfect situation. We would have at least, like, there's a little bit of like movie critic vibe with the curtain behind us.
Oh, completely. Look, I think this is the classiest setup, and we've recorded a couple of these in person, but
almost always in hotels.
Usually, actually, always in hotels.
That's true. Yeah.
And
your hotels and mine.
Yeah, once was a round table. Once was a very small, cramped hotel room. Once was a very big hotel room, but with nothing close to where we were actually recording.
Yeah.
This one, we've actually got a really lovely setup. And we can't show anybody because the cameras won't work properly, and we can't make it stream. Anyway,
maybe we'll take a picture or something.
We'll take a picture so you can get the vibe. Anyway, so this is episode 190. Yes, we are flying right up there. Not included in the numbers of things like the interview that I did with Leah Morrell the other day. Photo taken. The interview that I did the other day with Leah Morrell from PHNX Coyotes. That's not included in the numbering, so this is episode 190. We'll bring that back up in a minute when we get to the stuff about the Coyotes. But 190, we've got a few notable names, and a few notable names who either played a lot of games in 90 or played almost nothing in 90, but wore it at some point. Like Clark Gillies, Hall of Famer, wore it in 88 for Buffalo. But one season, he didn't even play the full season, I don't think, in Buffalo. I think he retired before the end of it.
Noted journeyman at this point in his career, Marcus Johansson. But back, I honestly do not remember Marcus Johansson playing for the Kraken. I'm shocked about that, to be honest. But he's back with the Minnesota Wild now after a long stint in the Washington Capitals and a bunch of other places in between. But look, it's I don't know. The interesting thing to me, the one that sticks in my mind, is Robin Lehner, because I think about that situation for Lehner. Like, do you think that the Vegas Golden Knights would be in the same position if Robin Lehner had been able to play all year?
It's a really weird question. Would they have been in the same position if they had better goaltending? It's a weird question.
Or at least more
to ask.
Stable goaltending. Like
I've watched Aiden Hill.
Yeah, I mean, look, fair enough. I mean, obviously, any goaltender we know, as we're going to talk about later, can get hot for stretches of time, especially in the playoffs. But, Vegas's goaltending has been such a roller coaster this year. I wonder.
Backups of extras.
The big what if is like, what if Robin Lehner was healthy this year?
They got Aiden Hill because the Sharks decided he wasn't good enough for them. Yeah. The Sharks decided that. And again, he just got passed around from team to team. And eventually, the Coyotes went, no, gave him to the Sharks went, yeah, rather not. And now he's in a Stanley Cup final.
Everyone's forgotten that Robin Lehner exists. I hope that he's doing well out there somewhere.
He's had a really rough couple of years. Yeah. Really rough couple of years. But, you've got... obviously, on the other side of that, Ryan O'Reilly's the most obvious one there.
Yeah.
You had 1 year of Nikita Soshnikov.
1 year of Mike Badama.
And obviously the other traveller there was Thomas Tatar, who moves around the league with a lot of regularity. I forgot where he was again this year. I think they had the Devils. I mean, that's right, he was with the Devils.
Yeah, he was kind of on and off injured all year. I don't know what his impact was in the playoffs or anything, but it's I'd be interested to see where that all ends up, especially, we'll talk about some of those teams in the coming topics. But for now, episode 190. Honestly, it's shocking to me that we're closing in on 200 episodes.
We are. It is a bit shocking that it's nearly... I had to explain that the other day when I was talking to Leah Morrell from PHNX, and I was sort of explaining who we are and what we do, and I'm like... We're at 190 episodes here, so it's not like we've been doing this for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But it really is impressive we've at episode 190. Thank you, everybody, for listening, watching, viewing, commenting, even if it's to tell us we're shit.
I mean, look, we wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun, but it's...
but self-indulgence is better than no indulgence at all.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's get into it. Speaking of indulgences, the Toronto Maple Leafs parted ways with Kyle Dubas. Don't know if you heard. Bit of a rumour going around that they weren't happy with him. No, okay, so look, we all know the ins and outs of it. He gave the press conference in Locker Cleanout Day where Chris Johnston asked him a fairly innocuous question.
Yeah, I think what he thought was going to be like a little softball question.
And what about the stresses of the job, Kyle? And what Dubas did was, and it's been really interesting to watch the media afterwards because we've had all these people complaining that what they want out of hockey players and admins and anyone in management is honesty. So Kyle Dubas gave a very honest answer, which was, look, it's stressful. I'm a family. We've got a young family. It's stressful. Look,
especially the last year, I think you mentioned has been like a particularly difficult time for his family, and maybe something that I think he mentioned that he hadn't really realised maybe how difficult it had been for them until recently.
And the line was, he said that in his mind, it was either going to be Toronto or he wasn't going to be a general manager and you weren't going to see him pop up somewhere else. Now, the way that I took that was that he wasn't going to actively seek any other positions.
Yeah. It wasn't like thinking about going elsewhere at that time. It was like, I'm totally focused on this, but,
I might walk away.
Yeah.
But what apparently happened, and I have to say apparently because... the Shanahan press conference is one of the most confusing press conferences I think I've ever watched. Shanahan, who had said in his press conference, everyone agreed that he should have got a new contract. We talked about giving him a new contract. We all agreed we were going to give him a new contract. I told him at the end of the first round, I said, we're going to give you a new contract. I told him at the end of the games against Florida, we're going to give you a new contract. And I was committed. And then he did that press conference. And I decided that he wasn't committed and maybe I needed to go another direction. So that one press conference apparently started it. Then he says that Dubas' agent rang him and made a new list of demands, at which point he says he decided that it was done. Not we had a conversation, we went back and forth, we negotiated, I went to the board and we talked. He decided, I'm done.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounded like it was very close to, being a sure thing. I mean, I don't even think... I've heard some takes about it as if, like, hockey talks about being, supportive of people struggling with mental illness and so forth like that. I mean, I don't even think it's that. No. I don't think that realistically, it being a stressful job is really says anything about Dubas' mental state or anything like that. I think that realistically... it is an incredibly stressful and difficult job, and it's normal for the reaction to be, I need to discuss this with my family because obviously this takes an insane amount of my time. This is a 24/7 job, and I need to balance this against, my, home life balance and so forth.
The message seemed to be wait a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, like, I think we keep getting recently hit in the face with this thing in hockey where, everyone complains about these cookie cutter responses, these, situations where a player or an executive gets asked a question and they give this really simple, like, cookie cutter, like, giving it 100%, going in the corners, digging out pucks, kind of, bullshit response.
Yeah.
And then the few times that it happens that someone doesn't give a cookie cutter response, the response is so out of proportion, is so astronomical that, it just reinforces everyone to be like, don't do anything, don't be true to yourself, don't ever show us your true feelings because we'll shit on you or we'll fire you or, well, not that he was fired, he technically just wasn't renewed, but so, and look, I've put down when we're talking about it, the idea of, they basically fired him, he wasn't renewed, but he was fired. Don't come into work, he's being fired. Yeah.
So, what seems to have come out in the reporting in the last few days after that was that Elliot Friedman reported that basically Dubas wanted to streamline the process of the chain of command.
Yeah.
And what has sort of come out in conversations is that when a trade was coming down the pipeline, most general managers can maybe have a go, have a chat with the hockey ops if they want to as well, but they can make the call.
Yeah.
They can go and make the trade. For Dubas to make a trade...
For the most part, like I think that most general managers have
Yeah.
some kind of proviso of like, if I'm trading for someone that's going to be like a $10 million cap
But it's
hit
a chat.
or something, like, maybe I have to check with ownership, or if I have to trade a star or something, I've got to check with ownership.
Yeah.
But for the day-to-day regular stuff, they're given an understanding that you know what you're doing, deal with it.
And what sort of came down was that the structure is that Kyle has to go and see Brendan Shanahan. Shanahan then has to get the board together and have a conversation with the board. The board then have to give the approval to Brendan Shanahan, who then goes back to Kyle Dubas and says yes or no. Now, in a business like hockey, especially around deadlines where you're making those decisions fast, and you've got 3 people on a call, and you're like, well, we need you to make this decision. I've got 2 teams on the line right now. You probably want to streamline that process. And what it's believed, and what Friedman reported, was that Dubas wanted to be able to report directly to the board. Didn't want to have to go through Shanahan for everything. Now, what it feels like to most sort of people that have talked about it, and now I think at the same point, is that Brendan Shanahan was basically being asked to sign off on Kyle Dubas cutting him out of the loop on hockey decisions.
Yeah.
Shanahan's not going to do that.
No.
So you reached a point where Dubas then put in, apparently, after they all got broken off, apparently on Thursday night, Dubas put in a message to Shanahan going, I want the job, I still want to be here, I still want to do this, we can make this work.
Yeah.
And when he went in on Friday morning, he went in fully expecting a contract and was told, go home.
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused by this whole process. Look, and this is not even about. There are going to be people who are going to be started sort of jumping all over this, going, stupid Leafs, Dubas, they can't get over the hump in the playoffs. Huh? If you were sacking a general manager for not getting over the hump in the playoffs, there's only going to be one team who has their general manager every year.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like, especially, I understand there's a little bit of a different stakes with Toronto in terms of. The
media is mental. We talked about it. The media is mental.
Obviously, the pressure is just turned up to 11 in Toronto in general, anyway. But we talked about it a few months ago. Like, is it going to be enough for Toronto if they just win one series? All of a sudden, that the weight's off or whatever, and that that's ticked off, and then it's okay or whatever. And I can't remember exactly what the feeling was at the time. Like, I think obviously. I think it still means something that Toronto won a series.
I think it does too.
I think it's it means that they're not cursed. Like,
it's progress.
I think he would have been fired immediately if they lost in the first round.
Yeah.
And that would have just been a knee-jerk reaction of just like, well, we've got to do something or whatever because this isn't working.
The irony being, as we talked about, they played a better series in the Florida series than they did against Tampa. They were much better against Florida.
The unfortunate thing with the NHL playoffs is it's not the fairest format.
No.
It's a...
Ask Vancouver fans.
Yeah, it's an elimination tournament in a sport that is notoriously random in terms that, goalie performance and, unlucky bounces, all that kind of stuff can play an abnormally, high percentage, result in a series. And it's just the reality of how it is. Like, we try to mitigate that a little bit with 7-game series, but then you got the variables of a sport that's called in such a way where people base the way they play the game off what game in the series it is, because the refs will call things in 1 and 2 that they might not call in 3 and 4, and murder is legal in 7. It's insane because we all know and understand this, but then we still make declarative statements like, but you have to find a way to win.
Yeah, the
other goalie put up a 970 save percentage and saved 40 shots a game, but you just got to find a way to win.
So there was a really interesting article and we'll come back to Dubas in a minute, and the job, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Really interesting article on the Hockey News by Rachel Dory. Rachel Dory's had a lot of really good media in the last fortnight in terms of some of the stuff on Stuff and Graph has been excellent, and her Hockey News articles have been really good. Yeah. And she wrote a really good article which I recommend you read. It's the background to what's happening at MLSE. And within Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the big thing that a lot of people are starting to make mention of, that everyone knows but no one ever talks about, is the role of the 2 telcos in Canada. So Bell and Rogers own a large stake in MLSE, and each of them have board members. What came out in the last...
Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, by the way, for anyone that doesn't know what MLSE stands
for.
for.
So what came out in the last week was that Rogers board members in particular did not like Dubas. They wanted to fire him last year. Brendan Shanahan talked them around and went, no, we'll give him another year, but we don't renegotiate. And the Rogers people were apparently quite happy to move on from it. What she wrote about was that Larry Tannenbaum is the CEO. He's the face of the franchise. He's the chairman of the board. He brought in Tim Lewicki, who was the CEO of the actual day-to-day runnings. And Lewicki was really well regarded by everyone. He's the man who put Masai Ujiri in place to make the Raptors a success. Once Lewicki left, Dory talks about the fact that inside of MLSE, the board started to have more of a say. And Rogers and Bell are in the middle of massive cost-cutting and slashing jobs. And you hear it all the time. You'll hear journalists all the time talking about, I've been laid off by Rogers, I've been laid off by Bell. Their attitude is cut. And it took Larry Tannenbaum himself to go into the board meeting to save Masai Ujiri's job with the Raptors after Masai Ujiri had won the NBA championship. Right? In a situation where they should never have won a championship, and suddenly they win a championship out of absolutely nowhere. They wanted to get rid of him because he wanted money. And so the board went, well, we'll sack him. And it took Tannenbaum saying, nope, not going to happen. But what we're seeing is more and more interference from Rogers and Bell on who does what within these sporting teams and less on the people they're hiring to oversee the sporting side of the equation.
It's interesting because we've been hearing for years about MLSE that money's no object.
Yeah.
This concept that this doesn't count against the salary cap, so we should have 40 people in this department. We should have the best sports science. We should have the best etc.
And that's one of the things that Dubas did when he went into Toronto was basically take the sports science and go, no, we need the best.
Yeah, it's certainly no shock that corporations suddenly decide that they need to maximize profits by.
And the talk was the Babcock contract was the turning point. They aren't happy that they're paying out Mark Babcock for that many years.
Yeah,
and they decided after that they're going to scrutinise executive salaries a lot more closely after what happened with Babcock.
Yeah,
but it's a really bizarre situation now because I think it's really interesting because Dubas had said at the press conference, for example, that he was open to all moves, including moving a member of the core four, maybe even two. They asked him about the future of Sheldon Keefe. He said that was something that we're going to internally address and have a conversation around. It sounded like he was finally... Everyone's thing about Dubas was, he's so pig-headed, he won't move off the four and he won't move off his guy behind the bench. And it sounded like Dubas was prepared to do both of those things. The other interesting tidbit of information that Chris Johnston talked about was that apparently after they got rid of Dubas, Shanahan rang the core four. And in those conversations, he said he didn't necessarily say it explicitly, but all four of the core four were given the impression they would not be traded.
Yeah. And
the idea that Kyle Dubas is prepared to do what all these people have been screaming at him to do, and Shanahan might have gone back to them and gone, no, we're not moving you, right? I can't wait to see what the reaction is in Toronto if they don't move one of those pieces.
I think it's really difficult, in that situation. I don't want to pretend like making trades is really hard. It's not that making trades is really hard. It's that
making good ones.
Making good ones is difficult. It's one thing to say, it's one thing to be an armchair pundit and say they've got to trade whoever or whatever. But there's got to be two teams involved in a trade. And whether or not, especially in a situation where everyone knows that you have to make that move, we've seen so many situations where teams have just been unable to find a good trade that makes sense for them, that actually makes them better. Everyone talks about it as if making a trade for the sake of making a trade is going to make a team better, that just shedding, John Tavares' salary or whatever is immediately going to make that team better, as if they're going to somehow replace 90, 100 points on the roster or something like that by just clearing up $10 million in cap space. It's silly and speculative, and a lot of this comes from the reality of the media talking about, they've got to do this, they've got to do that, they've got to do whatever. And again, this is going to fix the team.
And we've talked about Toronto media. Toronto media is stupid.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. And some of the takes, and it's the same people. Every year it's the same people. You've got Nick Kyprios, who would happily ship every member of that core four out tomorrow if you got the chance because they're not tough enough.
I mean, there's been some absolute garbage from Steve Simmons lately.
Sid Cicero in the media, calling everybody cowards and calling everybody you're a disgusting disgrace. Telling Kyle Dubas was a joke and a horrible general. And you're like, 2 weeks ago you were calling him the greatest general manager to ever live on the face of the earth. And the other thing is too, a lot of this stuff about general managers is hindsight. Like, for example, they just put out the 3 nominees for the General Manager of the Year. One of the 3 nominees for General Manager of the Year is Bill Zito. Now, Florida, yes, in the Stanley Cup final, but Florida got less points than Calgary that didn't make the playoffs and scraped it because your team couldn't be bothered to beat the Blackhawks, which is the biggest butterfly moment in the history of the NHL.
Yeah, I mean, I feel shame for that, but
you're responsible for Connor Bedard going to Chicago. You're responsible for the Florida Panthers probably winning a Stanley Cup.
I mean,
it's all your fault.
I'm not so upset about the Panthers being there, but the reality, I don't think that Bill Zito shouldn't be in the conversation because his team potentially wouldn't have made it or whatever. I do think that I want to reward people who go out and make big swings.
I like the fact that he made the big swing, but General Manager of the Year is a really interesting call.
Yeah.
Because they scraped it, and the funny part is the team they traded with, even though they didn't make the playoffs, got more points than them.
It's a little silly.
Brad Treliving left his job, got more points than the guy he traded with. He's in the Stanley Cup final, and Treliving might end up having to live through the hell that is Toronto.
I mean, look, if you want any proof that these awards don't really mean anything, look at the reality that every year the Jack Adams Award,
Sergei Bobrovsky is responsible for the destination of the Jack Adams.
Well, I mean, it's partially that, but it's also partially you wait 12 months and everyone who was in the Jack Adams conversation is already fired.
Which is what happened with last year's 3 finalists. They're all gone.
And it's a very similar situation with a lot of the GM of the Year candidates. You look at last year and you kind of go, what? Those fucking guys? Really? What did they do again? It's so quick. It's so easy to just make that decision just entirely based on the short-term ramifications of one trade or whatever to decide this guy's an incredible GM because he decided, his goalie got hot at the right time, or he, traded for this one guy at the deadline and then made it to the 3rd round.
And remember, 25 games into the season, Bill Zito was a bum for trading for losing that trade.
Yeah.
Because, what's Tkachuk doing in Florida? This is not working.
I mean, and it's one thing to say, I do think that was a good trade, but we make these decisions on a few months' notice, and then we suddenly, we may look back on a lot of these guys in 2 years' time and go, that was the fucking terrible choice. But it looks good within 2 months, and therefore he got an award for it.
Yeah, there was again, there have been people, I've been seeing people this week with all the hot takes on Dubas, and they're like, that Muzzin move was an absolute joke, and I'm like, no, Jake Muzzin was absolutely brilliant until he got injured for you. But the first couple of years of Muzzin was worth the first couple of years of Muzzin. And
it's so hard to see what's going to happen in the future too. The reality is that the GM of the Year award should be given out on the last 5 years kind of thing, at minimum 5 years, because so much of the GM's job is the long game.
Yeah.
It's contracts and the brevity of what happens in the long run. It's draft picks and what happens with those guys, whether or not they develop into anything.
If Toronto largely keeps the roster the same, brings in a new general manager, and they go on to win the cup.
Yeah.
Say, for example, just for argument's sake, say it is Brad Treliving, and we'll talk about Leafs general manager candidates in a minute. But say it's Brad Treliving. If Brad Treliving comes in and makes 1 or 2 small moves around the periphery, they keep that squad together and they go on to win the Stanley Cup final, people will be saying Brad Treliving won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
It's Kyle Dubas' team.
Yeah.
He built the thing.
Well, yeah, that's the reality of a GM comes in later on and takes the credit, and then you kind of go, oh, look at all this great shit. The cups that Pittsburgh won in 2016 and 2017, the guys who came up to play the bit parts in that roster were all drafted by Ray Shearer.
Yep.
like the as much as you want to say like, oh, Jim Rutherford, made the Kessel trade and made
might
these
actually be a really good candidate for Toronto, just quietly. But
yeah. I mean, but that's true. But made a couple of obviously Rutherford comes in, makes a couple of moves or whatever, puts them over the line, and they win or whatever. But they're not there without Connor Sheary. They're not there without Brian Russ. They're not there without those guys who Ray Shero drafted 7 years earlier.
And now Jim Rutherford is off destroying another organisation off the back of that. It's a really...
Jake Gensel.
Exactly. So Toronto have apparently said they want an experienced general manager, which is terrifying if you look at who are the experienced general managers out there at the moment who are available to you.
Experienced general manager is shorthand for guy who spends 1 or 2 years in every organisation before being fired.
I don't understand why Brad Treliving is the white hot favourite. I think. So the other day, the Leafs have confirmed they've interviewed Treliving. They've also confirmed Mark Bergevin got interviewed, and apparently interviewed very well and was very impressive. They also confirmed that Peter Chiarelli was interviewed. Now, again, Rachel Dory was talking about this, and it's like, I don't think they want to hire Bergevin or Chiarelli. I think they want experienced general managers to tell them what they think of the team and what they do. Yeah. So they're looking for advice at this point in time.
Yeah, and I think, like, they're looking to be surprised too. Like I think a lot of guys, they give an interview out of like either respect, or there are some guys that they give an interview because they're up and coming and they may not think that they're going to give them the job yet, but they want to be surprised. They want someone to come in and pitch some ideas and then kind of think about that and go, oh, actually that's a really interesting point, or we hadn't thought about that. Maybe if we did that, we would have some success, or we'll talk, we'll think about that in 6 months' time when we've got our guy in position or whatever. It's all there's no promises to the interview process.
Look, it's interesting because, like, Eric Tulsky has been mentioned for every job that's going, and I don't necessarily believe he's going to get any of them. The assistant in Carolina, for those who aren't aware. I just mentioned there someone like a Ray Shero, who I think would actually be not a bad option.
Yeah.
I think they've. It's an interesting process because if they were that sold on Treliving, he'd be the general manager by now. But I still kind of feel like they're going to end up there, or Brendan Shanahan's going to keep all the power for himself, and they're going to promote Brandon Pridham. And I think we're either going to get Treliving or Pridham, and it'll be one of those two decisions. That's kind of where I'm leaning at the moment. As much as I think that I don't like Treliving, because I think that I don't think that Treliving did, and I know that people will go, but ownership in Calgary really hamstrung him. I don't think that Treliving did anything in Calgary that would give anyone in Toronto confidence that he could put this team over the line. Because one of the big knocks on Calgary was they were not built to go over the line. They were built to get to the playoffs. Yeah. And then they fall apart. The other problem is, this is a general manager that had Johnny Gaudreau walk...
Yeah.
And basically had to move Tkachuk because he was going to walk. So this is a general manager who has managed superstars and lost them.
Yeah, I mean, like, nothing about Calgary in the last decade screams like, contending team or team that's good enough to make a, they've always been a team with holes that are, imperfect and never really kind of went anywhere.
Yeah, I don't understand why he's suddenly the hottest thing going in all of these GM conversations for Toronto. Again, I'm baffled as to why Tulsky's not going anywhere.
I think that, it's weird because it sounds like they're really sold on the experienced GM thing. They're sold on someone who, has...
well, they were trying to talk Doug Armstrong out of St. Louis for 5 minutes.
Yeah, they really want someone who's has had actual GM experience, not just a GM experience or whatever. The Tulsky thing slightly baffles me because, I don't know if it's just our echo chamber of, people that have been for 5 years going, we want Tulsky in a GM job, and the way that people talk about him, like I've wanted Tulsky for the Penguins position, the whole time.
And then the Penguins very quickly came out and said that he was out.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. I'm curious what that means. Whether or not it's really a matter of they weren't interested, or whether they want whether they actually wanted to go in a different direction, or whether realistically because he was at that point in time during the interview process, Carolina was still in the playoffs and he was the AGM there, whether or not there's some promise that he is the next successor to that team in the next couple of years or whatever. And I don't know. Obviously, we don't know what goes on behind those walls or anything like that. Whether or not a team is unwilling to give someone like that the reins. I'm curious. The Pittsburgh situation, I think, turned on its head when Dubas became available.
Yep. And so that's the last part of this, which is that it's now widely anticipated. Sidney Crosby had a meeting with Kyle Dubas. They set that one up. FSG, who own the Penguins, have been over in Europe this week. All the John Henry and all of that have been over in Europe. They're at the Monaco Grand Prix on Sunday, and they were probably, although I don't have confirmation of this, but as a Liverpool fan, I can probably tell you they were at Anfield over the last couple of days as the season finished in England, and they're trying to tie up a bunch of fast transfer moves they want to do. So while they're all over in Europe for Monaco, it makes sense to head over to Anfield, do a quick trip over there, set the budgets in place, organise transfer targets, approve everything, then come back to the US. I believe they're back in the US now. I kind of feel like by the time this comes out, possibly, or by the time most people listen to this, I think Kyle Dubas is going to be announced in Pittsburgh. The question is, what's the job title?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too. I could see president of hockey ops, and then hiring, Dash or, even potentially, maybe Tulsky, they'd turn back on him or something. I don't know, but, in the GM position or something. I'm curious to see how that looks, because clearly things changed for them when he potentially became available, because we'd seen a bunch of names. And interesting for me, there were mostly names that were a little bit more progressive. The list in Toronto and the list in Pittsburgh was very different. Almost no crossover whatsoever of the kind of guys that they were interested in.
Well, for a start, Pittsburgh's were always interested in Kyle Dubas.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it, when the playoffs started. Yeah. If Toronto is out and Dubas gets fired, he might end up in that position. And, we were slightly joking about it, but I think it was always a realistic opportunity for them, because the interesting thing, I think, for the Pittsburgh position is that, they do, at least from what they've said, want someone who isn't one of those old hockey men, is a little bit more forward thinking, is going to be someone who approaches it in a slightly different way. And to me, that screams Tulsky, but I think the weighing up for them is, do we go with Dubas, who probably thinks similarly, maybe isn't necessarily on the same level in terms of the approach and stuff that he has to hockey thinking, but has actual GM experience, has actual kind of people talking about how great he was in that position and being upset that he's gone and all that kind of thing. Does that probably slightly outweighs the potential theoretical position that Tulsky could have had, where we don't actually know because he hasn't actually had that role.
I'm really interested as well to see if Dubas ends up as president of hockey ops. I'm fascinated to see a general manager working under him, given that whoever Dubas hires for that position is probably going to be significantly older than him. Dubas isn't 40 yet. He's 37, 38. I
don't think Tulsky's that much older.
No, but that could be really interesting as well if Dubas has to hire a more experienced general manager to work under him.
Yeah.
That's a really intriguing... Look, I'm on the record as saying I think it's ridiculous. A lot of people in the media have now come to the same conclusion. SDPN and Staff and Graph both said the same thing, which is the whole Dubas situation feels like adults should have just walked into a room and had a conversation with each other.
Yeah.
Instead, Shanahan got his feelings hurt and got really petty, and Kyle his agent probably pushed his hand too hard, but pushed his hand hard thinking, well, we'll renegotiate back down from this.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of talk about the tension between Dubas and Shanahan over the course of the last 12 months, and it kind of just feels like Shanahan saw an opportunity and went, this is it, I'm going to take this one. I worry, if I was a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, I would probably worry about what the future looks like, because I don't think they're that broken. No. I think they seriously got goalied, and I don't think they're as broken as the media would have you believe, but I think they're about to make a really stupid move.
Well, this is the thing. I think that they're in the position that Pittsburgh was in after they won their cups, where they were still a good team, but they started just outthinking themselves. They started thinking like, well, we got pushed around by Tom Wilson, even though we won in that year. We didn't like how we, Sidney Crosby got pushed around, or we didn't like this, or we didn't like that, and started just fucking galaxy braining themselves, and started, doing dumb shit like trading for Ryan Reed, and just doing the
Jack Johnson,
just going against everything that made them successful. They were like, we went from just being a playoff, lock to being a contender. Let's not do anything that made us successful at that. Let's turn back in the totally opposite direction. And then spent 3 years just loitering around.
What's fun? Regression.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. Like, they just spent kind of, meandering around this couple of years before they went, oh shit, we fucked it up, and then we had to kind of slowly get back to that point again. And like, you wasted all of this time.
It's
just fucking around. I think that Toronto was really on that precipice where they just totally outthink themselves and think, oh well, all this isn't working. We've got to totally fucking change everything.
They're gonna move one of the core four for a really bad contract. I can see it. I've been saying to Brendon for the last 2 weeks, Mitch Marner for Artemi Panarin to New York. It's going to happen, and Toronto's going to regret it deeply.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they're in that much of a different position than someone like Tampa was in for a long time, where they just kept having bad luck in the playoffs. They kept not getting past the second round. They kept not, they kept having injuries, or they got goalied, or whatever happened, and they just didn't get past it. And then eventually,
people seem to always...
They just stuck to the process.
What I really get frustrated about with the Tampa thing, we're going to move on, but before we move on, I get frustrated with Tampa because everyone treats Tampa like they had that amazing season and then they got swept, and that was their fuck up in the playoffs. Go back and look at the previous 3 to 4 years of Tampa before that. They had, that was the year they were making the charge, and then, 3 key players got injured.
Yeah, Ben Bishop got injured.
Yeah, Ben Bishop got injured. That was the Stamkos injury in the playoffs. They have had... In that lead-up, it wasn't... The sweep was kind of the culmination of everything. Before that happened, the Columbus series, they'd had several years of getting to the playoffs as the expected favourites and screwing up.
Yeah.
And, it was... Eventually they got there, and then everyone just sees them as, well, they're a behemoth that rolls through. They weren't.
Yeah.
That was a
everyone wants to read too much into the results of the playoffs.
And Stamkos, by the way, in the last couple of Toronto series, has said that the whole way along.
Yeah.
They're where we were.
Yeah.
And we had to learn how to do this, and it's learned behaviours.
Yeah. And it's the same shit with, Washington, maybe to a different degree because they just kind of had the one really successful year. But they were a juggernaut for a long time. They were a really, successful regular season team that just kept running up against someone in the second round, usually the Penguins, that knocked them out, and they didn't make it, and they potentially could have won, but they got goalied or whatever happened, and then all of a sudden the narrative totally fucking changed. It was all, literally before they won, it was like, Ovechkin's not a winner, he's not a good captain, he can't lead them, he doesn't show up in the big moments, all this kind of bullshit. And then the second that they win, all of a sudden it's just like, oh, all that's forgotten about. How fucking great are they?
I'm just sitting here as a San Jose Sharks fan going, that's 15 years of our lives, and we didn't get the cup.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee.
And the thing was...
Sometimes the coin flips tails 15 times.
And it's one of those situations, again, and we'll move on, but the San Jose thing, 15 years of San Jose running into the Kings, running into the Blackhawks, and running into what was the other team of the era that had that problem, the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
And literally San Jose bashed heads against those 3 teams every year. And there were several of those. The funny part is, the year we made the Cup final against the Penguins, right, that's not the team that I would have anticipated as being the same. I still look back at the Vancouver series, where I swear we were absolutely robbed in that series. There were some really horrific calls. That team, I think it's the 2009 team, that team is the team that I would have looked at and gone, well, they were brilliant. Yeah. Like the team that made the Cup final, the reason why San Jose fans hold that in such high regard is we were shocked. Yeah. We were absolutely staggered. And then the reason why we weren't that upset a couple of years later when we got knocked out in the conference final was because like we beat Vegas in that really stupidly bizarre series. We weren't expecting to be anywhere near that. Yeah. Like, seriously.
I think we all know that the best team doesn't always win in the playoffs. You know, what we would realistically consider the actual best team usually isn't actually the team that wins. And it's actually kind of a refreshing thing when it does happen.
San Jose,
but then we all pretend later on as if, like, it's different, as if the best team won.
San Jose would have a cup, Vancouver would have 2 or 3.
Yeah. I mean, the Penguins won in 2009, and they were far from the best team in that. You know, the Kings won that year when they were, doing this Florida thing where they...
The Kings versus the weirdest Stanley Cup playoff for me remains Kings versus Rangers.
Yeah.
Both teams were absolutely trash.
Yeah.
But Henrik Lundqvist tried to single-handedly carry the Rangers through an entire series. I mean, look, I think in that last game where the Kings, they score, I think it's the double overtime, I think it is. When that goal goes in, Lundqvist makes 4 saves on the play for the puck to go in. I think that night he made something like 52 saves.
Yeah.
And he was single-handedly carrying a terrible Rangers team to a Stanley Cup final. And that Kings team was aging and not much better.
Yeah.
So... Speaking of building teams, though, and how you go about building teams, Craig Conroy's the new general manager in Calgary. And this is actually one of the most well-received hires I think I've seen from any team. I think Conroy's been there since he was on the playing staff before he retired.
Yeah.
He then moved into special counsel to the general manager in 2011. He then moved into the assistant AGM role in 2014. I watched his opening press conference. I thought it was a really good opening press conference. They asked him about contracts and signing players, and funnily enough, all of the bread for a living mistakes. And he said, I said to the ownership here, I was confident that Johnny Gaudreau was coming back.
Yeah.
I believed that Gaudreau was coming back. I thought that was done. And he goes, so I was shocked when he decided that he wasn't. And having watched that situation, I would definitely take that situation differently, and I would handle that situation if it popped up again extremely differently than we did back then. And I think it's someone who's been able to watch and learn, and this is where when Toronto goes, we only want an experienced general manager. Well, if you've been in a good situation and you've watched and learnt how to do this, I don't see why you wouldn't appoint someone. I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously he's got a lot of experience. He's got a lot of in that exact organization experience, So whether or not he makes smart decisions as a GM and and leads Calgary out of their funk or any, I don't know. I don't know enough about the man to say for sure whether or not he'll make those decisions. Right? It's a different thing, I think. Training to do that position and then actually doing it, and then whatever opportunities he's presented. But I'm curious to see how he goes. It's nice to see him kind of reach that promised land after such a long time.
I wonder if he's going to move Kadri. And my reason for asking about that is he made a very pointed statement in the press conference where they asked him about players coming and signing for Calgary, and he said, basically, I don't want players here because we're going to offer them the most money. If you're coming here because the paycheck's bigger than anywhere else, I don't want you. And I know that's partly, obviously, a general manager's got to say those things. And you're also not going to say, I'll give you all the money in the world.
Yeah.
But that kind of feels like a bit of a shot, given that Kadri basically only signed with Calgary because they offered him the most money.
Yeah.
So I wonder, and that hasn't worked. That has not worked at all. Speaking of situations, now if you didn't listen to it, it's still available on the feed. It's available on YouTube, and I highly recommend you go listen to it. The other morning I got up at 6. Oh, actually, I got up at 5:50 the other morning.
Yeah, props to you. To be honest, I was up, but I actually had work drama that I had to do. So
there was a whole conversation with Brendon about, so this is happening, and Brendon's like, you do it. So I spoke to Leah Morrell from PHNX Sports, who covers the Coyotes, and absolutely brilliant coverage. I would highly recommend go check out their YouTube page. In particular, go and watch the coverage, the live stream they did of the vote in Tempe, because I mentioned this when I spoke to Leah. Watching her try to cover this and the look on her face, because everyone had been told they were winning this vote and it was a mile clear, it wasn't even close.
Yeah.
And they get the first lot of numbers in, and her co-host is talking about all the things that are going to happen. And you just look at her face. She looks at her laptop and you just see her face drop. And at that point, you know that the vote's not going very well. And very quickly, everyone's expression just turns to, oh shit, we got this wrong. So the Coyotes lose the vote for the new arena complex in Tempe, Arizona, which put the entire future of the organisation in massive amounts of doubt.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're already in a pretty bad situation. Like, I don't think anyone can honestly make an argument that, you know, them playing at Muller Arena for a few years while they try to build an actual NHL caliber arena was like a good situation for the league. As fun as it must be to watch a game there, you know, it's clearly not a good look for the league in general. And then for this to go even worse, for the like, oh, it's okay, it's only going to be a couple of years and then we'll do this. And now basically they're having to like circle back to all their third and fourth options that they rejected previously over the literal garbage dump that they chose to redevelop into a site. You know, like if
American politics, ladies and
if that's the top option, is here's a literal garbage dump that we are going to redevelop and turn into, a great kind of like place for you to go
and they're like,
be entertained and gamble and do all this kind of stuff. Because look, this is a big part of the equation. The reality is that no one is building an arena, certainly these days, just for it to be an arena. Everyone wants an entertainment complex where they have restaurants and bars and gambling, casinos, you know, things like that or whatever, because that's the thing that actually makes you money. Like, that's the thing that, you know, is this constant stream of income that you own all of that, the revenue from some of those businesses, but also the rent from, you know, people opening, you know, things there and all that kind of stuff. You know, this is the...
Alex Morello, look, we talked about it on the podcast with Leah. Alex Morello has a gaming license.
Yeah.
Like, part of this idea was a casino, which complicates some of it too, because they've talked about using traditional Native American land, which you can.
But they're not allowed
to... But the gaming license issue on that is a really tricky bit of a situation there. They can, like, there are operations that can happen, but he can't own the license. It has to go to the reserve. And it's so... Look, and the other thing is too, like, this was a vote that they didn't actually have to legally put to a vote, but because of the way the system works over there in Arizona, if you get 100,000 petition signatures, I think it is, or 10% of the last number of people that voted sign a petition, it goes to a public vote.
Yeah.
And so they put it to a public vote anyway because they believed they were going to get through it. Now, part of the issue was they put one of the major unions offside, who then spent $2 million on a campaign of no. That doesn't help you. But the Coyotes really got this badly
wrong. The Coyotes getting people offside. That's shocking.
Alex Morello, the problem, as and like Leah mentioned it, and they've talked about it on PHNX Sports as well, part of Alex Morello's problem is that he didn't have a great start as owner, and he has some shady business dealings in the past. Now, the dealings that he's putting forward now, while there's public money in it, we're talking about it, it wasn't public money as such, although it is, because it's no taxes.
Yeah.
But you're not going to get anyone, again, as I said on the interview the other day, you're not going to get the Molson family building the Bell Centre out of their pocket. Like they did in 92.
Yeah.
The genie's out of the bottle, everyone's taking public money for buildings and moving teams if you don't.
Yeah.
So Morello was always going to ask for some cut of the options of how this money was going to be given out. It's probably the best option they were going to get.
Yeah.
But the problem you've got now, and look, I believe Morello should build it. He's a billionaire. He should build it out of his own pocket, but he won't.
No,
but,
I mean it's a business. Unfortunately, as much as the reality is, sports are a business, and certainly building arenas, and owning them and so forth is a business.
The problem is that there are a number of different options they're looking at as well. The problem was that the NHL's immediate reaction gave you they're moving the team vibes.
Yeah.
Then the Coyotes' initial statement gave, we're open to moving the team vibes.
Yeah.
So that became a massive issue. Then you have a situation where The Coyotes put out a statement the next day to say, actually, we're going to be okay. We've got other options. We're planning to stay. We're not going to move the team.
Well, the reality is that even if they got the Tempe site, it was going to be a few years before they could actually play there anyway, because firstly they had to remediate the site with all of the
$40 million worth.
The garbage that they had there, and then secondly, obviously they had to build an arena and get to the point where they could actually play there and so forth. So they were going to have a few years at Mullet regardless.
Yeah.
Realistically, no matter what was going to happen. The interesting thing is, like, it hasn't necessarily set back that timeline.
No.
If they find a site that works, they could still meet the same timeline of playing there for a certain amount of time. I think the unanswered question realistically as to whether or not the team is going to be, financially viable for Morello, and whether or not he wants to go ahead with this, is whether or not any other site gives him the same margins that he was going to get out of the Tempe site. Because if he doesn't, if for some reason, it's like, we can build this here and we can make this all work or whatever, but you were going to make, $50 billion over the next 10 years over this other site, and now you're only going to make, $100 million, and it's just not even worth it.
Yeah.
I can absolutely see a situation where it's like, it's not even worth it.
Well, the internal suggestions, and a lot of the Coyotes beat reporters are talking about what they think is happening, is that they've basically been told, you've got until the end of the upcoming season to come up with the answer. And by the way, that's not come up with the answer by the end of the season, it's during the season.
Yeah.
Because if you don't come up with a satisfactory answer, we're going to make you sell the team.
Yeah.
Now, because Morello said he doesn't want to sell the team. Well, he hasn't. Gutierrez has said it because he doesn't speak to anybody. Morello does not give press conferences, which is part of the problem here. He doesn't do any of the messaging. He's got his own messaging person who does all the conversations. But what I think is really throwing a spanner in the works is that Matt Ishbia, who's the owner of the Phoenix Suns, was asked about buying the team. And his comment was, because previously the Suns have had a really bad relationship with the Coyotes, and no, we don't want them, they were not building sharing.
Yeah.
They asked Matt Ishbia about what was going to happen, and his response was, if the team came up for sale, I would be interested in purchasing them, which would then lead to an arrangement between the Suns and the Coyotes possibly to share the Suns' new building. The problem is they've just finished a renovation on that building. Part of the problem with that building was, for hockey, it has terrible sight lines.
Yeah.
The renovation made those sight lines worse.
Yeah.
So if
probably not going to re-renovate again.
If he buys the franchise and moves them in, they would probably have to do another $50 million worth of re-renovation to change the sight lines again. So he'd really want to get a discount on the team.
Yeah.
Which I don't think he'll buy it off Morello in terms of a straight-up offer.
Yeah.
I think what might happen is the league might have some conversations on the quiet and go, well, we can revoke the license.
Yeah.
So we might just strip the asset from him if he doesn't want to make a reasonable sale to you. So I'm of the opinion that they will find something. There's the mall site they're talking about, I think, which was Plan B, feels like it might be. Look, everyone's talking about they need to find something in Scottsdale, which they do. Yeah. The other interesting one, PHNX Sports checked this out. Had this the other day. I mentioned at the very end with Leah, but understanding it was really tricky, but I do recommend going back and looking it up. They were talking about there's government-owned parcels of land in the middle of Scottsdale and in the middle of Phoenix.
I don't think that it's necessarily government owned. I think that from my understanding, these
they've got the leasing on it.
What are they called? I've gone blank on it, but basically my understanding of it is the opportunity zone.
Yeah, opportunity zone.
So I think what it is sections that are underdeveloped that the government has kind of flagged as, if you build something here, we will give you incentives. Yeah. I think is the reality. I don't think it changes necessarily the council who's involved with it or anything, but it's something where they've already got an initiative set up to say, hey, here's this attractive package that we're willing to give you if you build here and redevelop this area that we know is shitty. So, I mean, that to me doesn't sound like an ideal location. It sounds like to me like a nice way to say this is a crappy industrial area that we need fixed up.
Yeah.
But there are some tempting locations from like a distance perspective from actual like valid locations. Like they were talking about like there's a place that's quite close to the old to the Tempe site that they lost.
Yes.
They could very much get like a similar location. Whether or not the specifics of those are actually viable or attractive to ownership or to profit or anything like that is another question. Like,
the answer is they want Scottsdale.
Yeah,
because if you can get Scottsdale, you will get every player under the sun moving to the Coyotes.
And we know that they've been looking into locations for years. This isn't a new thing. This isn't all of a sudden,
they've got a very big
we've got to
list.
find some other things. They've been looking into all of this stuff for years. I don't think that there's like a silver bullet somewhere in Arizona that they haven't considered that all of a sudden is going to make them incredibly successful. I'm curious to see whether or not this really turns it all around for them, regardless of what happens. And I just honestly feel, somewhat bad for the players, for the ones certainly that have committed to being there for a while, and to the fans that have stuck with them for such a long time, just hoping that it's all going to turn around. Like, it's been a long haul for the Coyotes fans that are out there who are just trying their best, hoping for a good situation, a good team on the ice, and they've just been hit in the face constantly with scandals and
people yelling at them every 2.5 seconds to move the team.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of the things we did touch upon, and we'll move on in a second, but we touched upon it the other day with Leah, was that hockey development in Arizona and in Phoenix in general, in Arizona in general, has been brilliant. The youth development programs have been like one of the highest participation rates developing in the country. Their women's hockey development program in particular is really strong. There are a lot of pathways that are coming through there that didn't exist. And, you get the stock standard hockey doesn't work in the desert, which again we talked about today.
Which is bullshit.
Yeah, bullshit. I mean, there's a desert team in the final.
In the in the fucking Stanley Cup final. But like they also get an inordinate amount of this treatment as well. There are so many other teams that you could point at and go, oh, this team's bad, or they're in a shitty city, or they, whatever, or it's not, like there's 32 teams, fucking half of them aren't that great.
Columbus were terrible last year. Chicago were deliberately horrible and got rewarded.
Yeah. I mean, but it's okay because Chicago's a good city or whatever. Like, it's
legendary franchise. Gordie Howe.
Yeah. They got a great logo or whatever. Fucking oh my god. But the reality is that the Coyotes just get like 90% of the flack that like everyone points towards NHL teams, and it's silly how much they get compared to everyone else when they're in 90% of the same situation as every other team.
Again, Chicago did what they did and lost some money.
Yeah, let's not pretend that Pittsburgh is like a destination that everyone wants to live in, but they just happen to have a good team.
Exactly. If you look at a large percentage of NHL teams, you're not moving there.
They're not even the most attractive city to live in Philadelphia.
No, they're definitely not. The Islanders. The Islanders. First of all, they're supposed to be on Long Island, but they were, but they weren't, but then they were, but then they weren't. But they have a home somewhere. No, exactly. San Jose is all office space.
Yeah,
office space.
I mean, like, Winnipeg is a frozen fucking hellhole.
Yeah, the reason why
occasionally they get, I'll move the team, but it's nowhere near the amount that Arizona does.
No, it's
just because they happen to be in Canada.
Yeah, and it's just and like, well, realistically, like, Vegas should be getting similar sorts of comments of that, except for the fact they were successful.
They're successful,
because they got given not one boost but several boosts.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on, because I want to quickly hit the coaches carousel before we get to the playoffs. So we think there's probably going to be some more moves still. These aren't final yet. There are a number of open jobs. And as we said, there's going to be some general manager moves.
Probably a few more.
So I've put one of the ones that's likely on the list.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the open jobs are Anaheim, the Calgary Flames, the New York Rangers, the Blue Jackets, and the Capitals. And likely we're going to add the Toronto Maple Leafs to that mix. Possibly the Penguins as well, depending on what happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would give it a maybe 60-40 chance that Sullivan stays, but it entirely depends on who comes in and decides whether they want to.
I think we both agree that Sheldon Keefe's gone. It doesn't matter who comes in Toronto.
Yeah, it seems likely.
Yeah. All right. So what I just thought we'd do quickly before we move into the playoffs is just run through the teams and who we think is likely to end up where. Now I'm going to start with the ones from most obvious answers to down the line. So the most obvious one at the moment is Calgary. It feels like Gerard Gallant's probably already bought property.
Yeah.
And already has his swipe card for the building. That was one, again, very proud to say, I called that. Although what I did say was that I thought that Daryl Sutter would end up in New York, and I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah.
But
it's probably unlikely, I think, at this point that Conroy goes off, reservation and picks someone who hasn't been established GM.
And how much, genuine question, how much is Gerard Gallant paying his agent to tell everyone he's a player's coach? Like, there's no sign and evidence of it at all. But all the media narrative is, he'll go to Calgary and he'll fix that franchise. He's a player's coach. What? When? When did he become a player's coach? I'm yet to see it. The Rangers, I think Peter Laviolette feels like that's done. I'll be interested to see what that team looks like with a Laviolette system with the kid line.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that that's fixing anything for them, to be honest.
No, that's just rearranging deck chairs.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that the Rangers are committed, honestly, to making significant playstyle changes or anything. I really feel like they just want to, give it a kick. Go, we were good enough.
Their plan is to keep rotating it until someone gets lucky.
Yeah,
that feels like the plan.
Until they hit a hot stretch at the right time.
Igor has another hot stretch, and and Panarin remembers to shoot a puck. I'm going to go with the Caps next because this is the other one that seems to be fairly well linked, which is Andrew Brunette seems to be linked to Washington. I'm intrigued by that one too because Brunette obviously didn't get another go around with Florida, but won the President's Cup. Won the President's Trophy. I think it's really interesting to see what a Brunette team in Washington looks like, especially when you've got players sort of on the downhill slope.
Yeah, I don't know that it matters that much. It's pessimistic to say, but I don't know that it matters that much in Washington at this point in time with the personnel that they have there. You look at the Washington roster now, and it is a shade of its former self. As much as they still have, Ovechkin and Kuznetsov and a couple of guys there that are recognizable names. I know they had a lot of injuries in the last year, but you look up and down their forward core, and there's 6 guys on there that are, if you asked most knowledgeable hockey fans, no one could mention who the fuck.
I had a look at their Cat Friendly the other day, and I struggled to believe that half that roster wasn't creator players.
Yeah, they're guys that I'm like, Jesus, that guy's in the league, or he's there, or whatever. It's interesting because I think to me ironically the perfect coach for Washington with that kind of roster is probably Barry Trotz. I wonder how many years they're going to kick themselves for letting Barry Trotz go. I mean, look, I don't think that Barry Trotz is a miracle worker.
We're about to find out how good he is as a general manager.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but I think that. Maybe if they'd kept him, they would have had a little bit more success, stretched it out for a little bit longer. Obviously, the decline was coming at some point in time for Washington, as it does for every team. But I don't know realistically if any coach is going to come in and turn the Caps into a contender again.
I don't think so either.
Maybe they get to the wild card race. But
now, I think the next 2 jobs, the last 2 jobs on my list are kind of linked. So Anaheim, I think that Anaheim is going to interview 2 people from Toronto because Spencer Carberry is getting a lot of conversation talk at the moment, the assistant in Toronto.
Is that just because he's in Toronto?
He was kind of hot before he got to Toronto. He was going to be I think Carberry will probably land a job, but It also wouldn't shock me if Sheldon Keefe became available. If Anaheim went, can we speak to Sheldon Keefe, please?
Well, I think there's probably a bit of hold up on that. Like, you get that hold up anyway in the playoffs where teams are just waiting to see
someone to,
who fires their coach or GM and whether that changes their picture.
They want to see who panics. The answer this year, Toronto.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, that's literally what happened with Pittsburgh. They were close to announcing a president of hockey ops, and then all of a sudden Dubas became available, and they're like, well, maybe we'll think about it a little bit more.
Exactly. I think Calgary will probably end up in Anaheim. That leaves the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, what I've picked for the Toronto Maple Leafs is what I'd like to consider ultimate chaos. Bruce Boudreau. I think that would be fascinating. I mean, Boudreau's big knock is that he doesn't get over the hump in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Toronto's big knock is that they get over the hump in the playoffs. So ready-made excuses. Look, look,
there's an article already written.
I like Bruce Boudreau. It's felt for a long time like Boudreau at some point is going to end up in Toronto for some purpose.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like if you're not going to do it now, when? The other thing I'm feeling with Boudreau as well is that especially if Shanahan is going to make a move that's not necessarily popular, he probably needs something to win the fan base over. And it feels like Bruce Boudreau might be a move that you make to keep the fan base quiet.
Yeah, I mean, look, the question at this point in time isn't necessarily who is the best candidate for the Toronto position. It's who would Brendan Shanahan like to hire to work underneath him, basically. It's really what it is.
Now, the other one I didn't mention, and this is the last one, and the reason I didn't mention it is because the market changed in the last couple of days. So you had Brunette, you had Carberry mentioned with the Blue Jackets, you had a couple of other coaches whose names have popped up with the Blue Jackets. By the way, the favourite bookie-wise at the moment with the Leafs is Joel Quenneville, and the answer is no. Yeah. That should not be allowed to happen under any circumstances. But now, the hot favourite for the Blue Jackets job is Patrick Roy.
Interesting.
Who has been coaching in the Q, who won his team that he's been coaching, won the QJMHL the other day. I'm intrigued. Personality could be coming to Columbus.
I mean... Look.
He left over not getting more power. Jarmo Kekalainen's not... I don't know, is he going to hire that?
Yeah, I can't see that being a Yarmo move necessarily. But I mean, look, at one point in time they, I don't know.
At one point he was the hottest coach in the league.
Yeah,
must be said.
And then he tried to find another coach, and
then he did Patrick Roy things.
Yeah. Like
his natural Patrick Roy-ness kicked in, and he tried to fight players, he tried to fight coaches. Can you imagine? Just think about this for a minute. Can you imagine him on the bench in a game against Minnesota?
Yeah.
And him and Dean facing head to head.
I was thinking of him and Tortorella.
Oh, but we might see, but Tortorella's now hot air.
Yeah, but
whereas if you remember that
Columbus
Dallas,
had Tortorella,
if you remember that Dallas versus from this year, the Dallas versus Minnesota game where Peter DeBoer is going off his head and Dean Vason just giving a look of I'm going to remove your head from your body. I want to see Patrick Roy and them just go.
Stare off.
That could be book it. I want Patrick Roy because I want to see his head just pulled off his shoulders and held to the crowd.
You need something entertaining in Columbus. Maybe that's the...
Are you not entertained? And the Columbus fans go, not really, no.
And the fucking cannon goes off as he rips the spine out.
Who's about to rock? All right, speaking of not being entertained, the conference finals. Going to spend a minimal amount of time on this because we'll give the preview instead, because the Florida Panthers defeated the Carolina Hurricanes 4-1, because of course they did.
I mean, look, obviously both their predictions didn't really kind of work this time around.
Can I point out, just before we get into it, the favourite for the Stanley Cup in round 1, round 2 and round 3 all got eliminated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone who was named the favourite automatically eliminated.
I mean, look, it's been a fun playoffs in that regard.
Which means congratulations, Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, look, and we're guaranteed at this point in time that we get a first-time Cup winner, which is cool. Like, I like that. Obviously, the Panthers and the Golden Knights have both been in the Cup final before, but they haven't won it. So, like, I think that's fun. But, like, from the Florida-Carolina perspective, I think that, as much as obviously we picked wrong, we certainly didn't pick a sweep by the Florida Panthers. I think that we talked about a little bit in the conference final preview about the potential for, Carolina to be a team that takes a lot of shots that don't necessarily have a lot of danger to them, that, potentially if Florida manages to continue to do what Bobrovsky was doing, they aren't a team that has, like, game-breaking players who force a goal, like, that have this incredible, like, high danger chances or whatever. They're just, they might put 40 shots on, but maybe only 3 of them might be high danger chances.
Yeah, and by the way, I again, someone's going to yell at me. I know I said 4-1. It's 4-0, and I know it's 4-0. We all know it was a sweep.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said 4-1, but yeah, I think. Look, Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
Look, and again, yeah, okay, good. Matthew Tkachuk scored 2 great goals, and the overtime winner would send them through. Yep, fantastic, wonderful, brilliant. He had a really good third round. This is completely Sergei Bobrovsky, and anyone who says anything different is kidding themselves. And anyone who, at the moment, wants to take the idea that Matthew Tkachuk should be winning the Conn Smythe.
That's not to say that the rest of the team hasn't played well, but Bobrovsky is on another level.
So the stats.
Record-breaking levels.
Here we are. In his last 11 playoff games, 10-1-0, he has saved 402 of 426. He has a 9.43 save percentage. He has a 1.86 goals against average. He is 18.67 goals saved above expected.
So if you average that out, it basically means, like, you break this down to put in the most layman terms as possible. Every game he is saving 2 goals that would have otherwise gone in on an average goal.
And if
so you can wipe out 2 goals in every game scored against him. Just wipe them off the map. If the score ends up 2-1 and average goalies were in net and they won 2-1, it would have been 3-2 the other way.
Yeah, they wouldn't have got through the first round. They wouldn't have got through the first round against Boston.
And that was what this series was. Like, as much as you want to talk about, like, people picked on the Hurricanes with Brendon Moore and all that kind of stuff, going into saying, like, it wasn't a sweep or whatever. Like, it's the closest sweep that you can possibly get.
To not being a sweep.
Yeah, every game was a 1-goal game. 3 of them went to overtime. 1 of them went to,
double over,
4 overtime, quadruple overtime. It's about as close as you can get that, one coin flip the other way could have been absolutely the opposite. But that's not to say that Carolina should have won or anything like that. Certainly,
Carolina were deeply disappointing.
Yeah, the way that Florida is playing, the forecheck that they've got, the guys that are stepping up and scoring for them, it's all incredible and it's great that they're succeeding or whatever. But let's not pretend that they got blown out 4 games in a row.
No, look, again, the analysis of this series, which is very brief, is basically Sergei Bobrovsky. And, again...
In the good way. Because you can say that in
bad way, as we said.
In a bad way as well.
We've talked about this for years on the podcast, but, like, we joked around before. What was, for a couple of years there, what was the number 1 determining factor in winning the Jack Adams? Was Sergei Bobrovsky.
Yeah, I mean, it's the entire reason that John Tortorella won Jack Adams.
Yeah. John Tortorella has the Jack Adams because Sergei Bobrovsky remembered who he was.
Yeah, like, he earned that $10 million contract that year.
Yeah, exactly. And now he's actually earning all of his contract in one series because he's not going to do this again, guys.
That's not even a controversial thing to say. Like, no goalie realistically...
He was the 3rd choice going in.
Yeah, no goalie can realistically play like this on a regular basis.
If Spencer Knight's healthy, you don't see Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
And they might be out in, like, the second round.
Yeah, exactly. The other series, of course, the Vegas Golden Knights defeated the Dallas Stars 4-2 to advance to the Stanley Cup final as well. Now,
and that sounds closer than it was.
Now, this one is a couple of... So first of all, I put up a comment the other day which got me absolutely reamed in the comments, where I said that the funniest outcome for all concerned, right? The funniest outcome for all concerned would be Vegas.
Yeah.
And I got reamed in the comments where people go, "Oh no, never Vegas, blah 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 blah." Trust me, guys, I'm very much with you.
Yeah.
I still
noted Vegas dislike it.
I still don't like their roster construction, but we'll talk about it in a minute.
Or them as human beings.
Or them as actually, they're really nice people.
Yeah.
It's a nice team.
Yeah. Them as an entity.
But them as an entity, I don't like. But like again, noted Sharks fan, I hate Vegas. But the funniest outcome for me would be that Bruce Cassidy gets fired by Boston because they're like, no, you're not what we need. And then the Boston go on and win the President's Trophy with a record-breaking points haul, and Bruce Cassidy goes somewhere else and wins the cup. That is, for me, the funniest timeline. And I'm not talking about from a Vegas perspective. I'm talking about at Boston, who get to shut up. But having said that, I really wanted Dallas to win this series, but De Boer hockey has limits. Now, Vegas jumped out and crushed them early.
Yeah, so Vegas got on to a 3-0 lead, and there are you can count on one hand the amount of teams that have come back from a 3-0 series lead in the
Unsurprisingly, though, when Dallas did have their mini comeback, who was the number one figure leading the charge? Joe Pavelski.
Yeah,
Captain America himself.
Look, there's a lot to say about Jason Robertson.
Yeah, but Captain America himself in front of the net, causing all sorts of chaos.
For sure. I mean, look, to be fair, Pavelski scored a goal in that game and Robertson got 2. Yeah. But the reality is, it's that line. And Robertson up until that point in the playoffs had been quiet.
But it's what they do. It's to get De Boer hockey. And again, the reason why I bring up Pavelski on that one is, again, Pavelski's job within a De Boer system is to stand in front of the goalie and be an absolute shit.
Oh, yeah.
Tip everything.
No one does
and create the chaos so that players like Jason Robertson can do what they do.
Absolutely.
And it works really well when it's on. It took Vegas 2 games to readjust. And then they readjusted today. And the lack of anything from Dallas today was just... They were horrible.
Yeah.
Dallas came out on the ice, and I'm really interested that this is the first game back for Jamie Benn. They won the games he was suspended for.
Yeah.
And then he comes back into the lineup, and it's the most just horrifically bad performance that they could have put up in an elimination game. It wasn't close.
No, it was unfortunate. I watched the replays of some of the goals, and it didn't it was a nightmare.
At the end of the first, they were done, and they just sort of caved in after that.
That was it. I mean, look, as much as we say that about this game, it was inevitable. I don't think that anyone really expected them to win 4 in a row. No. That was always going to be incredibly difficult, and it's always really hard to close out a team when you're up on them. They just have you don't have the same level of desperation.
No.
If you have 2 similarly skilled teams. And one of them is fighting for their life. A lot of the time, that team wins once or twice before they get knocked out.
You'd hope so.
Yeah.
You'd hope you'd push back for something at least.
Yeah.
So,
but today was a bit disappointing. But look, at some point in time, they were going to lose. It was going to be whether it was this one or next one. I think really when it gets real interesting in those kind of comeback series is when it goes to 7. Because I think at that point, a lot of bets are off.
Then it's a coin flip.
Because then the team that was up 3-0 are fucking terrified.
It's like, when...
And they play like it a lot of the time.
If you look at a number of those series where teams won in 6, for example, in first and second rounds, think about it. Boston are the example of this. Boston had Florida dead to rights. If Linus Ullmark does not screw the puck up, we don't get to a Game 7. The second you get to the Game 7, if you're Florida... Well, you've got nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Everyone was talking about with Toronto in their first round series. They needed to close out.
It's free and breezy for the team. They needed to close
Tampa before they
pushed them to Game 7.
They needed to close Tampa before they got to 7, because if they'd gone to 7, Tampa probably would have won.
Yeah.
Because Game 7, oh my God, what the hell goes on here? They've come back on us. Shit, what are we going to do?
We're terrified of making a mistake, and the other team are just like, fuck it, whatever.
It happened to Vegas when San Jose beat them a couple of years ago, where San Jose ran back on them, got it to a Game 7, and Vegas shut themselves because San Jose just charged over the top of them. So you don't want it to get into that deep water. So the fact that they were able to close it out early, they got a couple back, and then they just stomped on them from a great height today.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the Stanley Cup final we all predicted at the start of this run, which is Bruce Cassidy versus Paul Maurice, you do. The Vegas Golden Knights taking on the Florida Panthers, which, if you listen to people in Canadian markets, they'll tell you this is the worst thing that hockey could have. I personally think this is actually a really good thing.
I think so too. Like in multiple ways. Like, firstly, because these are somewhat of the pinnacle, like, non-traditional markets.
Yep.
You can point to these teams and go, Florida, Vegas Desert or whatever, especially like one of the most recent expansion teams. This is great for the league in terms of selling themselves as, like, we're not just 3 or 4 teams winning all the time.
Selling the next expansion becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think it was already easy with the success of Vegas, but certainly if they win after the success that they've had. And look, I don't want anyone to... I don't want to hear people being like, oh, they were gifted this, or whatever. Like, take it up with fucking 10 of the GMs in the league. Seattle had exactly the same rules, and they're good, but they're not this team. Like, they're not like have been, in the conference final almost every year that they've existed good.
I think the weirdest take I've seen are the number of people who, for the third round started, wanted to talk about how Canadian this third round was. Right? Oh,
it's desperate.
And the other one was, Bettman's getting what he wants, the Leafs are out. Bettman's getting what he wants, the Oilers are out. Bettman wins.
The fucking lizard people conspiracies about Bettman.
There are so many things that you can be angry at Gary Bettman for.
Yeah.
I didn't hear all these people I didn't hear you yelling at him about what happened in Chicago. I didn't hear you yelling about what happened with, everybody else who was in the room in Chicago who didn't get fired or even spoken to. I heard none of you yelling about that. But it's those people that didn't yell about Chicago and think they're a great franchise and good for the game who are now yelling about the idea that Gary Bettman is rigging this so Toronto don't make it through and so Edmonton don't make it through because he doesn't want to see the biggest player in the sport in the cup final. I'm sorry, it is a load of utter shit. Gary Bettman is not great. He's not a great human being, but he didn't rig it so it's Florida versus Vegas, right? Again, as Brendon just said there, if you want to be angry at somebody for Vegas, be angry at every other team that handed them the players. You know who you should be angry at? You know who you should really... Well, Florida gave them 2 of their best players. Remember, the team you should really be angry at the moment is Buffalo. Because if Buffalo had let Jack Eichel get surgery... he wouldn't be playing on Vegas, and Vegas wouldn't be this good, because guess what? Jack Eichel's surgery that he wanted worked, and Jack Eichel has been amazing. You want to blame someone, blame the other general managers, who if they come to your club, you'll claim is a great rehire, and what a great hockey man. No, the hockey men did this. The hockey men did this. You know what? You know why Florida's been so good with Matthew Tkachuk? Because a great hockey man sent him to Florida. Right? Get it through your skulls. This is not a rigged system. This is hockey men getting what they deserve.
It's not even that difficult. Like, this is the thing. Like, we talk about it as if it must be a conspiracy that all of these teams are doing well and these ones are doing badly or all this kind of stuff. Like, it's just not even that hard.
No.
It's the simplest possible answer that some teams and some GMs and some whatever, like, are just not good at their jobs. And it's...
Okay, the Edmonton Oilers are out, not because Gary Bettman rigged it, but because they don't know how to build depth around Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and they can't get defence to save themselves. The Toronto Maple Leafs are in their own heads desperately badly. The Boston Bruins had players that were just about dead before the series started, and also they're all really old. Yeah. So this is what happened, guys.
Conspiracy theorists, honestly, are fucking adorable. Like, the audacity to like realistically believe that this kind of thing could be pulled off
and kept quiet,
and in a league that can barely fucking manage competent reffing, and
in a league where the salary cap is so low that players' wages are kept really tiny compared to other professional athletes, you believe that they'd all shut up about the conspiracy?
Hey, you know what I looked up the other day? What the NCAA football coach. Yeah. Do you know what the highest paid NCAA football coach is paid?
It's somewhere around the 40-50 million mark, isn't it?
It's 11.7 million.
Yeah, but it's over 6 years.
Oh yeah, but like per year.
Yeah, 11 million per year.
Yeah, which is more than easily more than any NHL coach.
Yeah.
Like probably double for most. I think 6-ish or whatever is the most that any NHL coach makes, and like it's almost more than every NHL player.
Yeah, they'd be in the top 20 players in the league.
And this is a college coach.
Yeah.
This isn't a professional football coach or whatever. This is a college coach at a university that probably that's probably more than every teacher in the university gets paid.
Completely.
Combined.
It will either be Nick Saban or Jim Harbaugh,
Yeah.
and both of those guys have been in the NFL and went back to college because it's very easy to get $11 million from colleges.
The NHL is a fucking joke compared to NCAA sports.
Yep.
It is not even close, and that is not even those sports at their highest level. That is those sports at like essentially the fucking OHL level, and we're talking about them pulling off a global fucking conspiracy where they're rigging teams to win and not win just to screw with the population of Canada. You're fucking adorable.
Look, you know what, we said it last podcast, but I'm going to reiterate it. The biggest problem with Canadian hockey is Canada, and in particular, Canadian markets. All of them. The Canadian media gets in your head and tells you either that the Canadian teams are the best in the world, followed by when they don't win, well, see, we're not that good because everyone's rigging it against us, right? Which is it? It's one or the other. And then when teams go to make decisions, they have to answer to the media. In the case of, as we mentioned before, Toronto, they have to answer to their own employer, because Bell and Rogers, who cover this team with an absolute microscope on every decision that's made, are also on the board. So why is Canadian hockey so badly ruined and the conspiracies are there? Is it conspiracy and lizard people, or is it because the Canadian market is screwed? Anyway,
let's talk about this series.
I think, and I'm gonna hate myself for this, I think Vegas is gonna win the cup.
I think so too. I mean, I want to...
Which means congratulations, Florida. Cause
I know. I mean, look, I think... I was honestly like thinking about it as we were leading up to it, because I feel like anyone that I pick at this point is going to be the one that loses, because like it just feels like that kind of year.
It's been terrible.
It feels like that kind of year a little bit. I mean, like, not that I was like, I actually got most of my first round picks right, but it's not to say that I'm picking wrong all the time. It's just that it feels like the kind of year where it doesn't matter whether or not you're the better team or you're on paper should win or anything like that. I think that so much of this for me boils down to whether or not Bobrovsky can keep this up.
Yeah.
Like, I think that if you match up forward core for forward core, even if you're factoring in, Kachuk and Reinhardt and Bennett and Barkov and how good that those guys have been and the success and stuff that they've had, you can point to a bunch of guys on Vegas in the same kind of way. You can talk about how great Mark Stone is. You can talk about how, great, coming out in the playoffs that Eichel has had and, some of the depth and so forth that they've had from Vegas in the same way. Like, I think that, from a skater perspective, I think that they both line up in a pretty interesting way. I mean, there's still some suspect things on the Florida roster. This is a team that we're talking about that is playing Mark Stahl in the top 4 in 2023. So, there are holes there for sure that can be exploited, but if Bobrovsky's saving 2 goals above average every game, that probably doesn't matter. And I think that is unfortunately the X factor, and it doesn't make for interesting analysis. But the reality is, which unlikely goalie superstar is going to crack between Adin Hill and Bobrovsky?
Yeah.
That's probably what it comes down to. I just don't fucking know.
I kind of feel like, and again, I've been the biggest critic of their roster construction, but the one thing that they actually kind of have over Florida, funnily enough, is depth.
Yeah.
All right, because my big complaint about the Vegas roster is that it's built purely as depth. It's not built with anything that's more, but Eichel has managed to prove himself as being that X factor. Stone as well, but Stone's been injured and is injured.
Yeah, and obviously he elevates them to a huge degree when he's in the roster, assuming that he's healthy enough.
And that was the other part of that conspiracy the other day, where someone was telling me that Vegas cheated because of all the cap space they were able to get because of Mark Stone, who's now back, and I'm like. Mark Stone's actually still injured, right?
Yeah,
this is
he's
not
playing, but he's not healthy.
Yeah, this is and again they didn't cheat. They did exactly what every other team does with the cap.
It's the rules.
You're welcome to do it.
Yeah.
Robert R. Island exists for a reason.
You can complain about the rules, but the rules are the rules.
Yeah, and again, if you're a Leafs fan, don't be surprised when next year Matt Murray mysteriously can't stand up and ends up on Robert R. Island.
Yeah.
But look, Mark Stone has played well despite the fact he's been injured.
Yeah.
But Jack Eichel has been the story for me.
Yeah, they're not there. They're not here without Jack Eichel.
And what has been impressive about Vegas is that they haven't had it hasn't been a case of it's just been Jack Eichel, but it also hasn't been a case of everyone standing up at the same time. They've had ebbs and flows. Marchessault didn't have a great start, was terrible in their first round series, then suddenly came into it in the last series. Marchessault was excellent. The depth on Vegas, and again, I still think they're paying far too much for some of these players, but if you win a cup, guess what? It doesn't matter anymore. You've won the cup. And I just feel like Vegas won't fall into the traps that other teams have fallen into with Florida. They won't fall into the silly stuff. They won't fall into the, you get the late hits, you get all those little bits and pieces. And they've got players who can dish those out too, which is the other side of the equation. They've got the players that will, if Florida want to play dirty, they'll play dirty.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like it's only going to take, and again, the analysis of round 2 with Florida remains, and internally within Toronto, their belief is, if they had managed, when they had Bobrovsky rattled early in that first game, if they'd put the foot down at the start of the second period and hadn't conceded the fast goals back, they probably would have chased Bobrovsky.
Yeah.
And if you get to Bobrovsky before he settles in, you can probably chase him.
Yeah.
If you chase him, you're then exposing Alex Lyon to the Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
And if you can make Florida worried about what's happening in net, that's and
I think that's possible. I think for sure it's.
And I'm not saying that Aiden Hill's a superstar.
No.
But Aiden Hill's not getting the same level of publicity, even though again Bobrovsky's saving 2 extra a game.
Yeah.
Aiden Hill's doing 1 to 1.5 saves a game. So they're both standing on their heads here.
Yeah.
I just feel like that Vegas are just rolling as lines, and Florida is very much focus on Kachuk, focus on Bennett, focus on Bobrovsky, and early first round focus on Montour, and I feel like you can get at them, and I think it's going to be also Paul Maurice. This is probably the hottest coaching streak of Paul Maurice's career.
Yeah.
And you're kind of always just waiting for him to kind of have one of those games.
I mean, the question is really boils down to how long can the miracle run go on for?
Yeah, I just feel like Jack Eichel's been too good, and I don't see it waning anytime soon. And I think we are then going to have a conversation around, well, where does Jack Eichel actually sit in the game? And people might actually have to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, Buffalo got it wrong. And just maybe letting him have the surgery was the right decision.
For sure. I mean, look, I think that you can look at the.
I think,
Buffalo
by the way,
situation.
I think that trade worked out for both.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, you can't complain about Tage Thompson and
No.
And what that's turned into for them.
It's worked out for the stage that both teams are at.
Yeah, for sure. But let's not pretend that Jack Eichel was a bum and wouldn't have been good for them.
No, of course he wouldn't have. He would have been great, but I think that allowing him to get the surgery allowed him to go and feel confident about being on the ice.
Yeah.
If they'd gone through the way that Buffalo wanted him to go, he might have been okay. But I think in the back of his mind, he would have always been playing slightly worried about what's the next hit going to do.
It's true. I mean, certainly, having a change of pace for him probably, a change of location probably helped him a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, look, by the time he left, the Buffalo media were really all over.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly sounded like it was a bad relationship between him and Buffalo.
So how many games?
I think this is going to go long. I can't see this being a short series. I don't think that either team is going to go down without a fight. I'm tempted. I'm wavering, but I'm going to go Vegas in 6.
Yeah, I was going 5 or 6 only because part of my theory is they're going to chase Bobrovsky. And if
I'm not sure that's going to happen straight away. But I wouldn't be surprised if they win game 1.
Yeah, I'm thinking Vegas in 6 as well.
Yeah.
If it gets to 7, as we said, it's a toss of a coin.
Yeah. That's it.
But I think if it ends before 7, it's Vegas ending it.
Yeah.
If it gets to 7, then again, we could 5 overtimes, 6
But I mean,
overtimes.
look, we've been wrong before.
We've been wrong the entire run. So congratulations, Florida.
We'll see how that goes. I mean, look, I would be happy with either of them winning it. I don't have a problem with either team winning at this point in time.
I do.
I mean, look, I know that, but I think that there's things to be excited about on either team. But I don't know. If you ask me who I'd prefer to win, I don't know. I have a little bit of a soft spot for Vegas.
Yeah, I know you do. I would prefer Florida to win it. I think it will be Vegas though, and that hurts. The idea that Vegas could come in and win a Stanley Cup, and San Jose's gone through what they've gone through, and that's a rough one. It's a rough one.
Well, look, if Vegas wins, you can look forward to me wearing my sparkly knockoff Wild Bill Carlson Vegas jersey in the next recording.
Is it as good as my sequin Matthews
jersey?
It's not,
unfortunately. It's too shiny, but not in
in the sequined way.
Absolutely sequined way that yours is.
Brendon has seen that jersey in person. I took it to Melbourne. It's a delight.
The real obvious side by side thing with the Vegas knockoff jersey, because I have a real one and I have a fake one, is that the fake one, if you look at the numbers, they've clearly got a really subtle background pattern on the numbers, and the knockoff is just not subtle. It's just the opacity is up to 70%.
It's like a Vegas casino inside.
Yeah. It looks like a pajama print on the numbers. I'll wear it. I'll wear it next time anyway. I'll wear it for the next episode anyway. And you guys can all see it.
Either way. Anyway, that's going to do us for this in-person recording of the Extra Shift. We will be back once we have a Stanley Cup winner.
So probably in a week or two?
Yeah, so probably in a week or two. And we will catch you all later.